West Ham Everton football tickets. I'm not sure if it's worth being charged with corruption for going to a West Ham Everton football game.
I mean, the West Ham fans might disagree, but
Right.
sure. I mean, it's
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Saravanan, happy birthday to you.
thank you. It's weird when you say my full name, but thanks very much.
Saravanan Sugumaran.
Wow.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I hope you had a good weekend. I'm very sorry about your football team, though.
Yes. I'm more sorry about the people who were damaged by the train line disruptions.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So-
I hope everyone has recovered from that. And I hope all the PSLE students and PSLE mothers have recovered well from last week. Anyway, here we are again. Welcome back to another episode of Local Politics. And our tagline is, that's
No
your job.
agendas, just answers.
Yes,
So
thank you.
for today's topic, we are going to revisit a slightly maybe older story from the news cycle, but one that I think we both thought it was important to cover off, right?
Yeah, of course. And that topic, of course, is the Iswaran trial. I say trial, but it was probably one of the most anticlimactic starts to a trial in Singapore's history possible. And the subsequent changes in the charges that he had and the guilty plea that he pled to.
Yeah. For us, I think when we were talking about it, we thought it was an interesting one to bring up just because of how things had transpired. I remember on the day when, they had reduced his charges, you were messaging me and we were surprised that the charges were reduced and also that he pled guilty after famously coming out and saying that he's going to, spend this time proving that he's innocent.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do today, at least, is to, lay out some of the facts around this case. As our previous listeners would have known, no agendas, just answers.
Yes, you already said that. Thank you.
But also we want to unpack what maybe some of the public discourse around this case is, why maybe it's pertinent to dispel, but also maybe raise some questions on what might be happening from both our perspectives.
Yeah.
And also talk about what are some of the other things that are happening around the world, like things that are happening in New York with the mayor, things that are happening with Keir Starmer, and all kinds of corruption charges that are also happening around this time.
Okay, so let's get started. I think maybe most of our listeners are familiar with the case, but just to refresh everyone's memory, in May last year, it became apparent that due to the investigation into F1's former chairman, Bernie Ecclestone, there was a link to a Singaporean businessman, Ong Beng Seng, OBS. And from that investigation, that led to some investigation into then Transport Minister S. Iswaran. And on July 11th last year, 2023, both Ong Beng Seng and S. Iswaran were arrested. And of course, then a CPIB investigation followed. And in January this year, CPIB completed its investigation and eventually S. Iswaran, Izzy for short, was charged with 27. He was charged with 27 charges, mostly under the Prevention of Corruptions Act and PCA, and we'll call it PCA from now on, and some charges related to the obstruction of justice. So that's the quick summary, and I think why this case caught a lot of people's attention was because of the things that he got in trouble for.
Yes.
The gifts that he got in trouble for taking.
Yes.
You remember some of these, right? Like
yes, I'm trying to find it.
West Ham Everton football tickets. I'm not sure if it's worth being charged with corruption for going to a West Ham Everton football game.
I mean, the West Ham fans might disagree, but
Right.
sure. I mean, I think there was an Arsenal-Liverpool in there somewhere, but there's also wine bottles, whiskey bottles. He also had impeccable music taste, apparently, or theatre production taste.
Yes, our producer Marcus made sure that we put kudos to Iswaran for being such a musical theatre fan.
For attending Waitress and not Hamilton, apparently.
He went to Hamilton too.
He went to Hamilton too, yeah.
Fine. Yeah,
So
which is
he
very
said-
avant-garde.
Yeah.
Did he go to like a bunch of concerts as well? Anyway, I think the total value of all these gifts he got, $400,000. Most, I guess, suspicious is a Brompton bicycle to the Minister of Transport. That's quite on the nose.
Yes, it's quite on the nose. I mean, it's when I was researching for this part, it was quite interesting because a lot of Singaporeans had obviously talked about this irony about him getting the Brompton bicycle.
Yeah.
But in fact, it was actually the most straightforward one because it was a birthday gift.
Allegedly.
Sure. That he had got. But for me, as I was reading through this, it was interesting how the whole thing transpired, right?
Okay.
Because I think they almost accidentally stumbled upon Iswaran and in CPIB's investigation because they were definitely investigating OBS. And through one of the flight manifests that they found that as Iswaran had travelled with him. So the whole investigation into Iswaran was almost a side cursor to their main investigation into OBS.
Okay.
And in a way, it's maybe you can say testament to what CPIB has done or in Singapore. The high standards of how we hold our public service our public service officials, that they went in and they wanted to make sure why was Iswaran on this flight manifesto.
You can say what you want, but CPIB is pretty hardcore. I mean, they've hauled up other ministers who are still ministers now, right, for hours and hours of evidence, right? So I think whatever you can say, whatever happens or whatever the discussion is, CPIB is quite hardcore and very on the nose, and I think we're very thankful for that.
Sure. No, absolutely. But I think for us, it's maybe now it's now important to also dissect how these processes have gone on, right? Well, right now we are waiting for the October 3rd sentencing. So in lieu of that, we won't be discussing a lot of what might happen on that day in terms of the sentencing, but the biggest, I guess, story here is why did they reduce the charge from the Corruptions Act to this very new charge, Section 165 in the Penal Code. You've had a look at it. Like, why did they do this, and what is the main kind of difference?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to note that we can't talk about what the sentence should be because that would be illegal. That's sub judice. That's up to the courts to decide. But to your point, the interesting thing is when the trial started that morning, everyone expected that as Iswaran, as he had been saying for months, he would plead not guilty, and he had pled not guilty to all the corruption charges. And about an hour into the live updates that I was following quite closely on Straits Times and CNA, a twist had appeared, which is that his charges had been reduced. And from 27 charges, it was reduced down to 5. And out of the 5, none were corruption. Yeah. So under the Protection Against Corruption Act, I mean, there's a very high bar to be convicted, right? Which is that you have taken a gift in lieu of providing a quid pro quo. I mean, everyone knows this. So a corrupt act has been found. Whereas this Penal Code 165 relates to civil servants and talks about, as a civil servant, you are not allowed to take big gifts. And in fact, what's interesting about 165 is that there is an implicit implication that you are guilty, or an implicit implication that something nefarious has happened, even if nothing has happened, if you receive large gifts, right? And so I think that's, again, an interesting law that before 2 weeks ago, nobody had really heard of, because this is the first time it's been used in Singapore. But it's an interesting piece of legislation that I guess protects and puts additional guardrails around senior civil servants from taking big amounts of gifts. Of course, the one side note is that he is also being charged with obstruction of justice, and that in itself is quite an interesting charge, right? Because after Iswaran took the flight on Ong Beng Seng's private jet, he had asked Ong Beng Seng to charge him for that. But that was only after the CPIB investigation had started.
Yeah.
And one more point, the day before the trial, the day before the trial, S. Iswaran paid back about $380,000. I think that's the number, or just a bit under what the total amount of the goods that he had taken in. So he made almost full restitution of the gifts that he had received.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that people will talk about, but it definitely happened after he found out that CPIB was investigating him.
Sure.
So for those who maybe haven't paid a lot of attention to the story, CPIB was investigating some of OBS's associates found out that this was being investigated, and the reports are that OBS called Iswaran and told him about the fact that he's being investigated. So what Iswaran does is, at least that's what was being reported, he says, bill me for the flights, which I guess for me is, a point that raised a little bit of eyebrows when I was paying attention to it. Because as an ex-civil servant, one of the first things that we are always kind of told to do.
You're an ex-civil servant?
Yeah. One of the first things that we are always...
Sorry.
Chain of thought. Don't interrupt as I'm... One of the first things that we are told, especially as a former civil servant, is that gifts or anything that you receive, these are taken as really serious items. So as an ex-civil servant, if I get anything, the first thing I always do is I will try and make sure I declare it.
Have you had to declare anything before?
Yeah, I've had to. Like in the course of work, sometimes you meet people from either other governments, other countries, or other private organizations. Even small things like a book, something like might even be a PR stunt that they're trying to advertise their infographic materials.
Right.
And it doesn't really matter what the cost of it. It could be $8, $10, $50, even more. It just becomes a very naturalized habit to just immediately declare. And it's in a way testament to the system that we are constantly drilled about these things. So the fact that when OBS, texts and calls Iswaran and says, these things are being investigated, the first kind of response by Iswaran was to, say, charge me for it, right? Bill me back for it. But then as I read through it, it's not even a like for like, the billing that he had asked. I think the flight tickets amounted to something like $20,000. It gets a bit grey because he flies on a private jet there, and then he takes a first class flight back, and he's asked to be billed back for about $5,000 odd. And so the fact that he didn't, declare it was the part that really got me kind of, how come, right? So for a lot of people out there who are talking about this case and saying, actually, it must be corruption, right? Because in the course of him being minister, he served two big portfolios, MTI, Ministry of Transport and Trade, and
Ministry of Trade, MOT.
MTI. MOT, Ministry of Transport.
Yeah.
MTI is Trade and Industry. STB was the stat board under MTI. And both the businessmen that he had received gifts from had ties around F1, which is part of the STB's agenda, and also this whatever Tanah Merah tunneling contract. Is it really not corruption? Do people out in public not have a right to feel that way, that maybe this charge is not fair, that he should be charged more for the kind of gifts that he has taken?
There is a difference between perceived conflict of interest and an actual conflict of interest. And whether or not there was an actual conflict of interest, I think based on what we know now and what has happened, it seems like there wasn't. But there seems that a perceived conflict of interest is so significantly detrimental to the trust in our public administration in Singapore that in this case, receiving large gifts and having a perceived conflict of interest is significant enough that he's still being charged with it. So I think it's very easy to conflate things and say, okay, the things link up with each other quite well. But actually, I mean, Ong Beng Seng and S. Iswaran, they claim to be friends. Ong Beng Seng and the other guy whose name escapes me now, they claim to be friends as well. They were friends.
Yeah.
And so I can understand a situation where, as friends, we exchange gifts all the time. And it was just something that happened. Where he was wrong, and I think where he's being charged, and correctly so, is that, like you said, he didn't declare the gifts that he received. In a person in his role, in the PAP, whiter than white, regardless of how you receive the gifts, as long as you're a minister, you better declare them. And I also think it's very good that we have this Penal Code 165 that covers senior civil servants from, looking as if they were corrupt.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair, I think. I mean, it's good to have that kind of understanding. I mean, one thing is to be tried in a court of law, another thing is to be tried in public opinion. And I guess it's important to at least lay out some of these facts, right, for people, because I think we have seen all kinds of conversations that are happening out there, right?
Yeah. And especially in a small place like Singapore, where there aren't that many people at the level of S. Iswaran or Ong Beng Seng, they do mingle with each other and they are friends. But of course, I understand why it's easy to be cynical.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good point. It's a good point for people to understand that these branches of government are separate, and we have a very good history in Singapore of making sure that we do the right thing. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong then, when he was making this announcement about how we're going to go clamp down hard, we're going to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah.
We have a track record of making sure that our public officials are held to account. But, just to draw back to some of the conversations or aspersions that people might make, do you think that maybe more information should have put out there, particularly around how they got to their plea arrangement? I mean, the prosecution might have some litigation risks in how they move forward with the case with Iswaran. But also, a lot of people are asking, right? Iswaran has maybe received these gifts, but what happens to OBS, who has made some of this so-called advancements towards? Because in Singapore, both the people who give the bribe and take the bribe needs to be charged, right?
Just to kind of close up your previous point, I think if you cast your memory back to July last year when the Iswaran announcement was made, first of all, it was at a pretty bad time for the ruling party because it was only, I think, a week or two after the Tan Chuan Jin affair scandal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you want to make the argument that the party or the government is in cahoots with AGC, I mean, the fact that this thing came out at a pretty bad timing for the party, it doesn't bear well for that argument, right?
It's not like they could have planned it.
No, it's not like they could have planned it together. What was my point? Okay, I just want to say, so you're talking about what makes sense. Okay, I don't remember now.
What, 21 minutes?
No, okay. I remember now what I was going to say. I think, if you look at how, I'm not a lawyer, you're not a lawyer yet. But
Thank you.
I think if you follow the courts and in criminal cases, and I've been involved in my work, some civil cases before, what prosecution usually does, I think, and I assume, is that when a crime is committed, when someone is arrested and when investigations start, AGC files a charge at the pretty much highest level, right?
Yeah.
Very, very often you will see that someone has been charged for murder, and later on, as the investigation is carried out and goes to trial and the court takes its action, charges are reduced over time to something like manslaughter or something like that. And that's because in our judicial system, the scope of charges can be reduced, but they can't really be expanded once a case has been filed. So just because the criminal charges against Iswaran started as a full-on massive suite of corruption charges doesn't mean that they naturally have to end with corruption charges to begin with. I can't really talk too much about cases I've been involved in, but something that starts at a very high level then are reduced down as both sides agree, okay, I'll take this out, I'll take that out, due to litigation risk or not enough evidence or whatever. So I don't think it's uncommon in Singapore for things to happen that way.
Right.
Yeah, I want to make that point too. So again, I understand why people feel that way. But to your point again, what's going to happen to Ong Beng Seng? Well, we don't know. In relation to his case related to Iswaran. Yeah. So time will tell.
Let's wait and see.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's good that we did this episode, particularly on the way we run this podcast. It's good to make sure that all the facts are out there.
Yeah.
In the next segment after the break, we are going to talk a little bit about corruption that happens elsewhere.
Yeah.
It is important also because as Iswaran's case was happening, Al Jazeera, BB News, international news media were really kind of highlighting and focusing on this. And I was very heartened to see that. Most of the first paragraphs were Singapore, a country that takes almost no prisoners when it comes to corruption cases. What is actually going to be happening? So we've made the international stage in that sense.
in a good way, I guess.
In a good way, I guess.
Okay, all right.
So let's go for a quick break. Now that we have talked through the facts about the case, and let's come back and talk about how corruption happens elsewhere in some other cities.
All right. See you later.
Hey Daniel, welcome back from the break.
Sure, we haven't gone anywhere.
we just got more informed during the break.
Sure.
But for those who might be tuning in now or maybe missed, we are This is Politics.
No, it's not. It's Local Politics.
Oh shit, yeah. We are.
This is Politics is a different show. My goodness.
Sorry.
Do you know where you are right now?
What is our podcast called?
Local Politics. Do you know where you are right now?
Okay. We are Local Politics.
Thank you.
Majula presents Local Politics.
Yes.
And our tagline is no agendas, just answers.
Sure.
We are on all your usual platform channels and YouTube and TikTok. And Instagram, apparently. That's new as well.
Yeah.
So very good. And we dissected not dissected, but we summarized the happenings of the S. Iswaran case. And now we're going to talk a little bit about how corruption happens, elsewhere. What do people need to know?
Yes.
How are other countries, cities dealing with this? But also, if there are any possible solutions or possible questions or agendas that we might want to raise in Singapore on how we tackle further corruption.
So, Sarah Vanan, in your previous life,
Yes.
you were, as they call, a journalist.
Yes.
And you covered political journalism in the UK.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you about what is happening now over I don't know how serious it is, I can't tell, this furor over Keir Starmer accepting box tickets at the Emirates Stadium.
Right. That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Look, the UK is a fascinating country, mainly for a lot of things, but also because they have set themselves a lot of transparency mechanisms on how they deal with corruption. For example, a lot of MPs, they will publicly state a lot of gifts and donations that they have received. So this registry is made public. It's on their parliamentary record and briefing papers. General public can go and access this information. It's not mandatory, and MPs do it. Ministers are encouraged to do it, but it's not mandatory for them.
So what's the point?
Well, it's for when they get caught, I suppose. And in a way, it's also for their constituents to know how transparent a particular MP is. Like when I was in the UK, there was a guy, very, very, very underrated guy in my opinion, called Jeremy Corbyn.
Never heard of him.
One of the reasons why he was, he kind of shot to fame is as leader of the Labour Party was because he was the MP of Islington back then. Now he's an independent candidate. He took the least amount of gifts for any MP, and this was seen as a badge of honor for an MP. So it has its purposes, I think, this public registry. And recently, Keir Starmer, ever since he became the Labour leader in 2020, he has declared a lot of the gifts that he has received. One of it, and the one that has become, has got a reputation in the news angle, is that he's a hardcore Arsenal fan.
Ugh.
It's a good time to be an Arsenal fan, I'll give him that. But he has declared a lot of the tickets that he has received, and particularly come under a lot of scrutiny because he's been receiving a lot of matchbox VIP tickets for his Arsenal attendance.
Okay.
Now, the interesting thing about this story, I guess, is that he has been a lifelong Arsenal fan. Unlike some other ministers, he has not forgotten the team that he supports, which is very promising. But because he's a lifelong Arsenal fan, he makes the argument and the case that he has to sit in VIP boxes, or that he has to sit in parts of the stadium with VIP or a secret way to watch the match because of his current standing as Prime Minister.
Right.
It would just take too much tax dollars and too much money spent on his own personal security for him to go and watch the match. Traditionally, the Labour Party, which is in government now, is seen as a much less richer for richer only kind of a party mechanism. So the fact that a Labour Prime Minister is, sitting in these VIP box tickets, I guess makes news.
Well, first of all, it must be nice that you can be the Prime Minister of a country and still have time on a Saturday afternoon to watch a footy match.
True. I mean, if you're an Arsenal fan, I guess it's only 45 minutes because most of the time you've won by then. But yes, I mean, I think for me, what's interesting is, the fact that he's declared it makes it news. The fact that this registry is public means people have access to it. It's not mandatory, but he finds that it's necessary in his life to do that. But also he's willing to take the criticism and maybe stand up to some of those questions that are being asked, not only in the opposition, but also in the news and also among general members of public. I mean, he's always described himself as a person of the working class. And now some of the rhetoric has changed. If you look at some of the Sky News, he has said that he is definitely representative of much of the working class, or he definitely sides with the working class. So a lot of linguistic verbatim things that are changing, and that's part and parcel of having a public-facing job. Saying that the UK is not anywhere near the top 5 of the Transparency International Index that ranks least corrupt countries. So one can then question, right, whether this is a good mechanism. The other country that I wanted to talk about, or at least the city that I wanted to talk about, is this incredible story of the New York mayor,
Eric Adams.
And some of the corruption.
What a legend he is turning out to be.
What a corruption that has happened there. And for those who haven't followed the story, it's very timely for this podcast that all these leaders are having corruption charges, as you're talking about Iswaran. But he's received a lot of business class, first class, and complimentary upgrades on Turkish Airlines.
Yeah.
Mainly because, from what I gather from the news that I've read, is that he was very pivotal in allowing for a bureaucratic complex to go ahead despite having questionable fire safety ethics and standards.
Allegedly.
The trial is still commencing.
Well, he's been indicted now, so he has to go and answer these charges. I think it's some of the descriptions of what has happened is quite funny, right? Like he wanted to go from New York to where was it? Like the Seychelles or something?
Seychelles, with his fiancée.
Yeah, with his fiancée for vacation, and there is a direct flight from New York to Seychelles, but he decided to stop over in Istanbul. Yeah.
Yes. There's the famous text that he goes, is there a way we can stop over Istanbul on the way to Seychelles?
Well, I would if I could, because they have great barbers in Istanbul.
Sure.
But Eric Adams famously bald.
Yes.
So,
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, this is also very interesting, right? Because he's a Democrat, or at least seen as the party that is supposed to be doing the right thing,
right?
Going against this, the usual corruption charges that the Republicans stack up. But actually, if you look closer, corruption within the U.S. Congress is not a new thing. There's been a lot of cases about this happening. A couple of years ago, when I think it was CBS who did an investigative documentary, they realized that Congress beats hedge fund bets on stocks by 6 percentage points. So on average, they make better financial decisions because they're privy to more information, right? So those two countries are usually the go-to when you think about democratic institutions or countries that are upholding these democratic values, but also very questionable ways of dealing with corruption. The things that I wanted to talk about was generally within the Transparency International Index, Singapore does pretty well, actually. We are in the top 5. Countries that are generally better, Norway, Finland, even closer to home, New Zealand. And even these countries are having some issues. Norway is generally done really well, but last year, the Bloomberg reported that, quote unquote, Norway is struggling to come to terms with a welter of cases involving conflicts to do with corruption, interest, and cronyism.
Okay.
They replaced their foreign minister late last year after she admitted to participating in government decisions that her husband owned shares in.
Ooh.
This is a bit new for them to be dealing with these kind of scandals and challenges in Scandinavian politics. Also, if you look at New Zealand, they have slid down in the Corruption Perception Index. And it's because the people there feel like, maybe I should give this objective information as well. This index is also kind of supplemented by the World Economic Forum's opinion surveys that they do with residents every country. So the reason why New Zealand fell down is, even though they are doing well in terms of their legal bureaucracy and governance structures in place, people in New Zealand felt that it was not enough. So you could still have a high bar and still dropped in some of your corruption standards. So it goes back to the point that we talked about earlier, right? It's not enough that you are having a good standard, but also the public needs to know and believe in it.
Right.
And I just felt like we needed to talk about these cases that are happening because The Guardian reported just last week, actually, that overall corruption, and in terms of the amount of gifts that MPs are receiving in the UK from 2010 to recently, has been the highest it has ever been. In fact, the most amount of gifts came in the last 2 years. Now, that's really worrying, right? Throughout the pandemic, all kinds of seismic shifts happened. And all kinds of different corruption charges might be happening even more. The inequality seems to be increasing, and people are finding different ways to funnel all kinds of money. And Singapore being a financial hub, and with attracting more and more high net worth individuals, we might be privy to more and more of these cases coming up. And it's important to have this record, and not only the legal record, but the trust among people that as a country and a city, we'll be protecting ourselves from some of these corruption cases.
And, Singapore famously built and developed itself off the backbone of being known as a very staunch anti-corruption bureaucracy, right? I think that is one of the cornerstones of our national story. But I also want to draw the attention to what Minister Chun Seng said, right, when this happened last year, which is that actually in Singapore, we have a very, very good track record for dealing with corruption. We also have a very, very good track record for having low levels of corruption. And so just because whatever is happening in the West, or just because this thing has happened with Iswaran, doesn't mean we have to go and throw the baby out with the bathwater and look at what are the internal policies for civil servants. Because in this case, I believe that actually the process has worked, right? Sure, CPIB was investigating someone else, but they didn't stop when they saw something wrong with a very senior individual. And the process took its course. And eventually the charge, this guy, Iswaran is going to be in trouble. And I think that is not something that takes away from Singapore's, storied legacy of being anti-corrupt. It's something that actually proves that our process works.
Yeah, that's true. It's a good point to raise. One of the things that I wanted to also talk about while we are discussing this in the same vein is Dr. Gillian Koh. Actually, I need to thank my wife for this because we're recording this podcast one day after my birthday and I didn't have time to do the research and she helped me with it. So,
and she's here, actually.
And she's here, so thank you very much. But she helped me find that Dr. Gillian Koh, a very recognized political commentator in Singapore, said that it's not very transparent, it's not very clear how you link activities of people of high position of interest to actual corruption. It is, despite all the statutes and provisions that we have, it is a very difficult one to go through. It's very difficult to link one person's actions to corruption. In the business world, like you probably will know, there are a lot of things that does happen, a lot of things that gets exchanged. And in our definition in Singapore, you need to have quid pro quo. So something must lead to another action or something in return of a favor, right? And it sometimes it's really hard to prove, even if you have all the information and evidence. Right. So I guess the question is then, are there things that we need to revisit? So when I was looking at this thing about the UK and how they have this register that shows members of public the kind of gifts that the ministers take or MPs are receiving, I wanted to ask from you. You're a party guy. You've been a party guy for a while. Do you think these kinds of mechanisms should be implemented in Singapore? Does the party, you've been in the party for a while, how seriously do they take this? Is it very much frowned upon? And do you think there are other things that we should be doing as a country to prepare ourselves to face with all kinds of future corruption charges? Yeah, look, I can speak from experience that this is taken very seriously. And I think famously, if you want to think about what the best way to move forward is, it's to take an outcome-based view. In some of the grassroots work that I do, we take it very seriously. Every meeting begins with with a reminder to declare your conflict of interests. And I can't imagine a situation where someone would not know that they are doing something wrong if they are doing something wrong, right? Yeah. And from a party perspective, I'm not that deep in, right? So I can't comment on the ins and outs of what a MP or minister does. But I do believe that as MPs, they all declare their financial assets to the Prime Minister. And so there is a check and balance there. The example of what they have in the UK from an outcomes perspective is, to my mind, not that effective, right? Because it is less about actually rooting out corruption and more about a perception of an MP. You can choose what you want to declare. It's not mandatory for a minister or an MP. So what is the point of that? Yeah, we know that Jeremy Corbyn had the least amount of gifts and costs during his tenure as the Labour leader, but that's what he wants us to see. That's what he wants us to see. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's true. I think there is definitely a public perception that is in play. But I also think it's as important because one of the reasons why he became Labour leader is because people are very disenfranchised with people who are not even declaring. And that's politics. Yeah, exactly. And so maybe it is good to have to register because you are encouraging more and more people to put out what is it that they're declaring on their own. And investigations happen anyway, irrespective of whether people declare or not. And once you've declared, maybe you, in a way, you feel a bit better and people know that you're more comfortable in declaring. It might even help you politically, since it is a political game after all. But, you've talked about a party guy. I'll just briefly talk about being an ex-civil servant. For me, having not been part of the civil service at all, entering the civil service, it took me 1 year to get my clearance, and it was a very difficult thing. And one of the first things I did, or I faced as soon as I joined, is I saw how seriously they take it, how they make sure that you declare everything. And, part of me felt kind of proud that as a country, these are the steps that we are taking. And I know I can't talk about, the potential results of the judgment that's going to come on October 3rd from the High Court. But I think a lot of civil servants, current civil servants, would be looking at this case with a lot of interest, because a lot of the reasons why I think people take their jobs very seriously or the declarations very seriously is because they know that a very high standard, high bar will be imposed on you.
Yeah.
And, I think if found that there is corruption or whatever the charge that are going to be laid out, this will have a reaction for how the rest of the civil service will look and see how they take gifts. So
we'll have to see.
We'll have to see. It is important, I think, not only winning in the court of law, but also in the court of public opinion. I think when you're in politics, these things will be remembered for a very, very long time.
Sure.
And I hope we do the right thing. At least I'm kind of glad that the BBC and Al Jazeera, even though I think they were looking for something to write about, I think so far we are standing that test of scrutiny. So, no, all in all, I think, let's see what happens.
All right, mate. Great episode. Thanks for coming here the day after your birthday. And I'm sorry to your wife for having to sit through this.
I think she's used to it. I did it on our wedding day as well. So I think, but no, it's good. It's good that we are doing this. I think, one of the reasons why we do it is to make sure that everyone gets the facts. And I think we have at least talked about what people are talking about on the street. So let's look forward to the next episode, I guess.
We are Majula Presents. What is it? Do you remember now?
Majula Presents This Is Politics.
No, Local Politics.
Local Politics.
We are Majula Presents Local Politics. Oh my goodness.
Again.
We are Majula Presents This Is Local. Oh my God, you killed me.
Hypocrisy at its finest, people.
Okay. We are Majula Presents Local Politics.
No agendas, just answers.
Thanks for listening. Please give us a 5-star rating and a like on YouTube. Check us out on the Majula Media TikTok and Instagram feeds.
See you soon.